welcome back to my channel. My name is Shamika and this is Check the Rhymes. I am super excited about today's guest because I actually met him in 2018 when he was inducted into the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame. And you're asking me like, okay, why were you there? Well, I am on the advisory board there. And for John Tesh, I actually created the script for his induction video and did the voiceover. So in my head, you know, we're kind of like family, you know? Anyway, he's joining me today to talk about his memoir, Relentless, and we're gonna dig deep into his career because, you know, being a former television news producer myself, I'm very interested to know about his TV news career and how he kind of made the transition into entertainment and how he dealt with the obstacles along the way. So he's also going to answer some of your fan submitted questions. So stay tuned because you don't want to miss today's show. Joining me today here on Check the Rhymes, I have John Tesh. Welcome to Check the Rhymes. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
You know, I met you in 2018 when you were inducted into the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame. And so congratulations again. And that was an exciting night. Tell me about that. Tell me about when you found out about it and what that was like.
Yeah, I mean, it was, you always think, I always think that there's been some mistake, you know, so it was, I mean, it was really nice of the committee because I mean, my whole career really got started in North Carolina. My whole family, all generations all the way down, are from North Carolina, but I was actually born in New York.
Right.
It's just that everything that happened for me in the halcyon days of the important time in my life was in North Carolina. I mean, everything from being in jazz bands at Cameron Village in Raleigh to being thrown out of college for forging a professor's name. My dad throwing me out of the house, you know, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And then every summer for 18 years, for as long as I can remember, I spent 2-3 months on a farm way in rural North Carolina, working a farm for my grandpa. So I think they figured that this guy probably has more roots than a lot of people here.
Yeah, and I would be one of those on the committee. So I was part of the ones that voted.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you. I didn't get a chance to really thank you.
I was like, do I tell him? Yes, and then
now you can. Now
yes.
you can. Yes.
And I wrote the script and did the voiceover for your induction video, and I was actually just watching it again.
Oh, that was great! That was really awesome.
You.
And you saw that Bill Leslie was there too, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, there was a guy that I met in North Carolina. I went to North Carolina State, and he went to UNC. We didn't hold that against each other, but I got this job doing pretty much sweeping floors and doing very little at WKIX in Raleigh. And this was in, 1973. And Rick Dees was a morning guy. And Bill was this hot shot radio news guy. Now back in the day, not to digress too much, but as you know, back in the day, I shouldn't say as you know, you're not old enough to know, but I know you know the history of radio and television. But back in the day, it was radio was much bigger than television, especially with, you know, when it came to news.
Yeah.
You know, not really until the Zapruder film came out with the Kennedy assassination did people even take television news all that seriously. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we had huge audiences, and so I ended up at this great station, and one of the big newscasters there was Bill Leslie. And he was so nice. He trained me, and I had no idea what I was doing. And then Rick Dees, who his roommate, left and went to Memphis to write Disco Duck and be very famous. And
I have that album downstairs.
Right. And Bill said, "Do you need a place to stay?" And I said, "Sure." And so we became roommates. And then he inducted me into the Hall of Fame. And thank you so much for voting for me. And I was very excited to know that there were no voting machines, that it was done by hand. So there's no Hall of Fame. I can't say fraud, but there's no Hall of Fame fraud. If you know
right,
what I mean.
right. And for me, it was an absolute pleasure to put your induction video together because I I have a background in television news as well. So it was like, oh, we're like kindred spirits. And then at the time I was freelancing for Entertainment Tonight. So I think I came up to
I
you.
remember talking about that. Yeah.
Family.
Yeah. We talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was amazing. So speaking of, you wear many hats, like, from you've been in news, you've done sports, announcing and music, radio, and now, well, not now, but you've got a new memoir coming out called Relentless. So tell me a little bit about that, when it's coming out, because I'm excited to read it.
Yeah, it's out now.
It's out now. Okay.
And I talked to HarperCollins, the publishers, and said, really, during a pandemic? And they're like, yeah, people have plenty of time to read. I'm like, that's an interesting way to look at it. I think what they really meant was that the book is sort of about a guy who had average talent, but big goals, big dreams, right? I mean, I was right in the middle of my class in high school. It was a great, Garden City High School in Long Island was really, they didn't call it this, but it was a performing arts school. I mean, everybody was in the 3 or 4 bands and orchestras, and a huge theater department. And I was a very, very skinny kid. So I played soccer, and this was a tough guys' school. This was football and basketball, and the cheerleaders and Friday Night Lights even, and all that stuff. And I'm like, I play soccer. We had like 13 people who would come to see us, and one of them was my mom. And so I didn't really, I didn't have a chance of, I wasn't popular, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. I was very available on Sadie Hawkins night, which for people who don't know, that was when the girls asked the guys out on the dance. So I spent a lot of time in my basement, and yeah. I wrote music, and I learned a bunch of instruments, mm-hmm. and I learned how to struggle, as Brene Brown said, the great writer, who's partnered up with Oprah Winfrey many times. She wrote a book called The Gift of Imperfection. Yeah. And I think I really had that because I had very minimal talents, but everybody around me was so talented and so popular, mm-hmm. that I was just sort of, it was, there was a guy named Billy Kidd, an incredible Olympic downhill skier, and he was my color commentator when I was doing skiing coverage for CBS. And so we were, every day we'd find ourselves like in Austria or somewhere in Switzerland or even in Aspen, and we'd be covering these, we had these amazing ski courses. And I said to him after about the 4th or 5th day, and we spent like 4 months every year in these places. And I said, will you please give me some ski lessons? And he said, no, I don't do that. I'm not doing that. He goes, just follow me and do everything that I do. And that really stuck with me. And so from that moment on, well, even earlier than that, but I realized that I had been doing that my whole life, where I had been decoding people's greatness. And even if it was Bill Leslie or any of these guys, figuring out what they did and then just doing that, or getting as close as I could to it, right? And that's it. It's really biblical too. It's mm-hmm. what Paul says in the Bible. It's like follow me as I follow Jesus. I don't think he said exactly that, but you get the concept. So there's a guy who wrote a book. Austin Kleon wrote a book called Steal Like an Artist. Mm-hmm. Great book. And I realized when I looked back when I was writing the book Relentless, I looked back and I realized that's what I was doing. I didn't have any personality of my own. I didn't really have any talents. And so I just sort of kept looking at these people of greatness, and I read their books, I read their memoirs, I studied the music, I studied keyboard players, and I studied announcers, mm-hmm. and I just kept practicing. I tried to emulate what they were doing, and you never get there, right? You never get as far as Vladimir Horowitz or something, but you become a pretty good piano player if you keep trying.
Yeah, that's awesome. So and I know in the book, obviously you mentioned a little bit about that, about there were so many obstacles that shaped who you are as a person. Is there, I know from the moment you actually said, that you were homeless, and I remember saying that in the video, I think, and then you've also dealt with cancer as well. So can you talk a little bit about how some of those things shaped who you are today?
Yeah, I mean, and the cancer battle and the unique way that I got healed was really what got the attention of the book publisher. And they said, "Would you write about that?" And I said, "I really am not interested in writing about cancer."
Yeah.
And they said, "Well, is there anything else interesting that's happened in your life?" And I got to the point where I got thrown out of school. And I was homeless living in a park. And they said, "Yeah, maybe you should start writing and see what happens." And they wanted the book in 6 months, so they hired a ghostwriter, right? Mm-hmm. Who interviews you, and he takes the tapes and he transcribes them. And it just didn't work out. He was great. But I realized that if I didn't go through the cathartic procedure of actually writing the book, and I know how to do some writing, but it's when somebody says you got to write a book.
Yeah.
What I started doing is I started reading everybody's memoir. I mean, everybody from Winston Churchill to Stephen King wrote this great memoir called On Writing. And so 6 months turned into 2.5 years. Oh. But it was great. It's great that happened, though, because there was so much that continued to happen with my cancer battle and cancer recovery during the time I was writing, that it's a better book because of that. Yeah. And so instead of just 2 big giant chapters on the terrible suffering of what was supposed to be a terminal cancer, it was a terminal cancer diagnosis. We titrated it throughout. It was almost like This Is Us, right? Yeah. We just kept going back and and getting stuff. And with my wife as one of the editors, it was easy to figure out what I had done in certain times. But I had to call people up. I had to call up Bill Leslie. I had to call up people from CBS News. My friends John Stossel and all those guys. My friends in Nashville, and I say, what was I like during that time? And the answers weren't always great, but at least I was really driven. I didn't really have much family time, and I sort of drove it into the ground because I realized that was my. I think I was always chased by the possibility that I was going to be back in a tent.
Oh well, yeah, that'll do it. That'll push you to keep going. Yeah. Yeah, I read that. I think I read that in maybe it was a press release or something. And I was like, yeah, that would definitely keep you, like I got to keep working. I got to keep busy. I got to keep pushing towards my goals. Absolutely. Well,
and the other way to understand that, too, is that when I was laying out some of the early chapters, I'd send each chapter to the guys at HarperCollins. And there was a 2-chapter thing where I was talking about my home life, my parents and stuff. And when they were writing the summary of the book to give to these book buyers, one of the lines was, and he escaped an abusive childhood. And I said, whoa, what are you talking about? And they said, well, it sounded like things were really tough. I said, no, I was just in a family where the mom was a retired surgical nurse in the 1950s and 60s, and my dad was a retired naval commander, a World War II hero. And he was a very demanding guy. He demanded that my mom stop working. He demanded that my older sisters not date anybody. And he demanded that I do something with myself, Right. And so he did not. There were no participation trophies in my family or in most families back in that day. And I make this point too. Sadly for moms, women in the middle 1950s and 60s, when the suburbs were first coming up on Long Island, especially, Betty Friedan wrote a book called The Feminine Mystique, and it's an incredible book, but it also describes my mom's plight really accurately because, again, she was a surgical nurse, but women back in those days, wives and mothers in particular, they were expected to quit their jobs, and if you didn't quit your job and become, a Susie homemaker, there was something wrong with you. And so Betty Friedan, and this is in the book, Betty Friedan referred to that as women in the 1950s and 60s in suburbia were buried alive. And when I look at my mom and when I was writing the book, I was like, wow, that was just because my mom was very quiet. I mean, she wouldn't engage in battles with my dad. It was just it was a very passive aggressive family. And here I am, going, hey, look what I did. They're like, yeah, that's fine. Next, I'm watching Ed Sullivan. Don't bother me, kid.
Right. Yeah. So what would you say, going back to like your news, since you were talking about how you had to call them to kind of see what type of person you were then. And I know in my own news journey, of course, I feel like each station I learned something different because you move around a lot. what would you say is one of the biggest lessons that you learned in television news before you went on to do like CBS Sports and then, Entertainment Tonight and everything else? What would you say for local news? What would you say?
What were the years when you were in local news?
Without telling my age, I actually started working in local news when I was in college. So probably 1997, 98.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the local news had really come of age by then.
Yeah.
I was already out doing Entertainment Tonight. Well, actually, I was out of Entertainment Tonight in 1996, but the first local news station I was at was in Durham, North Carolina, and it was WTBD Channel 11.
Yes.
And it was so long ago that I tell people this story on stage, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" Is we developed the news film. And that was actually my first job at WTBD. I was the news film developer. And basically, for people who don't know what the heck I'm talking about, instead of picking up your iPhone or a handy cam, you go out with a CP16 16 millimeter camera and then a sound recorder, and it's a 3-person crew, and you shoot whatever it is, a fire mostly, or a car wreck, and you come back and then you have to develop the film, and that takes a half hour or more, and then that film goes on the projector, and then the video camera takes a picture of the film being projected, and that's what goes on the air. I mean, it's like, what? And Cronkite, same thing. They did the same thing. When I got to Nashville, it was that was when the ENG, as you know, electronic news gathering started with big giant digital cameras, and then in Orlando, same thing. But when I got to New York, it was really a trip back in time because New York hadn't switched; they were still heavy duty unions, right? And they had and this is 1976, and they had not figured out the union thing yet when it came to, if it doesn't have film in it, then how can you be in the film union?
Yeah.
So they were still trying to figure that out, and there were lawsuits and all kinds of stuff. So we went out with a 3-person crew. I wasn't allowed to touch camera. I couldn't touch the microphone until they handed it to me.
Wow.
A lighting guy. So it was called electrician. So a camera person, an electrician, and an audio person. And no women were on any of these crews until later. It was a man's game. Yeah. And most of the crew, God bless them, were chain smokers, and they were hungover while they were out there. So here I am at 23 years old. Come on, let's go investigate something. They're like, get out of our face, Tesh. And so that's what that was like back then. Yeah. But the amazing thing of doing that, though, is I didn't do this at CBS, but certainly in Raleigh, Durham, you're editing film with a razor blade, and it's destructive editing. Meaning, if you make an edit on your iMovie or whatever, you can just say you can push the backspace key, and it all comes back. Now with this, you got one shot at it. Yeah. But I learned a lot about making good choices, and then you learn a lot about how to shoot things and stuff. So I love having that background, and it gives me something to talk about with the grandkids and stuff, so they can ignore me.
Yeah. And I it's funny because I can't edit at all, like with this new stuff. But like, if you put the stuff from the 90s in my face, then I'm like, oh yeah, I can do that. Like,
yeah.
It's hilarious. Let's see. I have all my questions written down, and I'm like, I can't see. What would you say?
It gets worse. Go ahead. Sorry.
Did you have a process for going after your goals? Because I know that now, just when I'm looking at social media, a lot of people kind of are like, oh, do a vision board or write out your goals, or what was your process when you're like, this is what I want, this is what I'm going after, because I'm not going back to living in a tent?
Yeah, I think this was why I took the chance of forging my professor's signature. So I was in the textile chemistry. My dad, who was one of the vice presidents of Hanes Underwear, we got free underwear for most of my life.
My mom worked at Gerber. I got free baby food.
There you go. Yeah. In fact, it's good even later in life. So what happened was my dad figured that I would starve to death if I was an entertainer. In fact, the word entertainer to him was the guys on Ed Sullivan who spun the plates, or the guy with the monkey, David Copperfield. He wasn't around back then. It was somebody else. Siegfried and Roy. So he just thought I would starve to death. So he said, no, I'm going to enroll you in North Carolina State University, early decision, and you're going to take textile chemistry courses, and you'll follow my footsteps. I'll have a job waiting for you. And I'm like, that sounds like a plan, whatever. Maybe he's right. Meanwhile, I had a couple of scholarships to music schools, in Idaho, and then one in Kansas City.
Yeah.
But I thought, well, I got to be an adult now. So here I am in textile chemistry, taking organic chemistry and quantitative analysis and shade matching 101. And I'm like, this is terrible. I don't know, what am I going to do? My grade point average was like a 1.8.
Oh.
And my friend Steve Thomas said, hey, I'm getting ready to take a course. If you want to raise your GPA. And I said, okay, what is it? He goes, Radio and Television 101. I said, that sounds interesting. So as a kid, I had built a couple of little radio stations at home. So I thought, that sounds like fun.
Yeah.
And so I went in there, and I'm telling you, maybe it was the same way with you. Within 30 minutes, I was done. It was like, I'm not going to make underwear. I am going I'm going to make television shows.
Yeah.
So that's really where that started. And that was at that moment, I had that revelation of what I was going to do, and then I just had to figure out how everybody else was doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, prior to that, I actually had some very serious instruction in piano and trumpet. I was actually a better trumpet player than I was a piano player. Where I was in, our elementary school was like New York State School of the Year with music. I mean, this is like you're in second grade, right?
Right.
And then my mom wanted me to be a concert pianist, so I had at least 2.5, 3 hours of studies, musical studies, a day,
wow.
even as a first grader, because my mom was very serious about it. And so all of a sudden I had this radio and television thing, and I still had all the training with music, and they started coming closer and closer together when I got on the news, when all of a sudden I was doing news themes for this person or that person, or I'd be playing late at night in a jazz club and stuff. But I was as were you. I was very focused on getting better, on being better at what I was doing. And I always sent out, I was crazy. I sent out tapes every week to stations everywhere. Demo tapes for people who don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I've just recently had all my footage from college transferred to digital. And as I've been watching the footage, I was like my accent, the way I talk now, it sounds nothing like the way I talked then. Because I went to school in Tennessee. So I started to talk like the people that I was around, and I couldn't understand anything I said. And I was like, no wonder nobody called me back.
Sure. I actually got a note about, I'm from Long Island. So, it's like, hey, what's going on? What are you doing? And a lot of guys in my dorm room were from New Jersey, and because a lot of the other folks back east will go to Southern schools.
Yeah.
And so when I ended up in Nashville at WSM, same thing for me, where I sent out tapes, and I always wanted to work in St. Louis at KMOX. It's one of the best news operations in the country. And Ron Batista, who I've actually I had told this story to not long ago. He doesn't remember it, but he sent me back a letter with my demo tape, just saying, "I'm sorry, this isn't for us. There's just too much of a Southern accent." I'm like, "What? Well, are you kidding me?" So apparently, that was happening.
Yeah. I think the note that I got was because I worked hard to get rid of it, and then I applied at a job in Knoxville, Tennessee, and they said, you don't sound next door, like girl next door enough for us. And I was like, are you, what? I should have just stuck with the way I sounded, but it wasn't meant to be.
The Nashville thing for me was a crazy time because it was 1974. I was there from 74 to 76. And it was an hour-long newscast, and they were the first ones in the country, really, a local station, to have an hour-long newscast. And so when Channel 4 did it, that meant Channel 5 had to do it. So there's big competition there. But there wasn't an hour's worth of news in Nashville at the time. Yeah. Right? So when I was there at 23, Oprah was at Channel 5 at 19 and a half years old. Pat Sajak was the weatherman on my station. There was a guy named Dan Miller who was amazing,
Wow.
who was my co-anchor. And so Oprah and I actually were on a lot of assignments together, and we became really good friends. And we would go out to dinner together. I mean, that story has now been made to, oh, you and Oprah were a thing. You were going out. I mean, yeah, we weren't sleeping together, but we were actually, you know, we were friends, and we would go out. The sad thing was, I mean, again, this was 74, that, you know, there were still places there where it wasn't okay for a white man and an African American woman to be on a dinner date.
Yeah.
You know? And so we found this out the hard way. We went to a place, and I was talking to her about this not too long ago. We walked into the restaurant. We're sitting there for a while, and then all of a sudden it's just like, and then people start to leave, you know, and so then we'd be alone. We have our own restaurant, you know.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I don't think they wanted to ask me to leave. I was a big guy, so it was like, you know, so it became a thing where it was like, you know, I don't know, we'd work for like 2 weeks, and we'd be on an assignment together. So I said, hey, you want to grab dinner? And she said, do you mean empty a restaurant? I said, yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it's not like that anymore, of course. Yeah. But back in the day, I mean, and you know, it's easy for me to say this now in retrospect, but I'm going to say that I've seen Oprah. She was, you know, because there wasn't enough news in Nashville at the time, they would send her like to an opening. I sent her to big stories, but they would also send her to an opening of like, I don't know, I sent her to a garage sale or something, you know, and she would go there, and they'd say, you know, in her ear, they go, listen, we just lost this story and that story. We need a half hour. You know? So she's there, and she could do it. She just interviewed everybody, and that's really how she got her job in Baltimore and ultimately syndicated. But I watched her, and I was big on emulating people, and I said, I don't think I can do that. I can do 5 minutes maybe, but I don't think I can do 30 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think I could do that either.
Yeah, that's 30 minutes, and it's actually some of the best television you've ever seen, you know.
Wow. So is there a story that you covered that sticks out in your mind? Like just from your whole career?
So many, you know, so many. I mean, the big story that I did that actually got me the job in New York City was I had a great news director, Mike Kettering. He was hired out of New Orleans. And he got within, I don't know, we landed at the same time at WSM. And within 6 months, he had like, I don't know, $15-20 million worth of lawsuits in Nashville because he was a real newsman. You know, he was that, you know. Unlike today, I got that in, sorry. And so we couldn't have an opinion. Do you remember that? We couldn't have an opinion? And my wife is like, listen, you got to stop talking about this. You're going to get canceled. I said, no, you got to stop yelling at the television because, you know, people who come on the television, forget it, left, right, center. We're not talking about any of that. But you're looking at the TV, and these people are having their you know, commentaries, and I start screaming at the TV, like try to pull it off the wall. And she's like, you're not a commentator anymore. You're not a correspondent anymore, John. You can't do that anymore. But back in the day, you couldn't unless they put a thing on the bottom that said commentary. You couldn't have an opinion. And so it was such a different time. And under Kettering, the news director, he was really tremendous, and he was a newsman's news director. And together, he helped me and he stood up for me. We ended up getting the fire codes changed in Nashville. Wow. And the fire marshal was fired because we had it was like a deep throat thing. We had all kinds of people giving me information about how he was taking money under the table, and he was signing off on these buildings, and the buildings were these condos that are attached to each other were burning down altogether, many of them, and they should have been happening, and so that was a big story for me, and again, it got me my job in New York City.
Wow, when you were talking about Oprah, it reminded me I was a newspaper reporter for a brief period of time for Johnson City Press in Johnson.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Yeah. So, and I remember I worked on the weekends, and they sent me, so my first story they sent me to, they were like, you know, luckily they sent a photographer with me, but they sent me to it was called a lawn crank. And I was like, a what? And so I had to write a story about, and I had no idea. I was like, I'm clueless as to what this is. So it was in the woods. And it was just a bunch of people. They were.
Are you saying lawn crank?
Yeah, they were cranking lawnmowers, and it was like a competition. And I was like,
"Oh, that's awesome! I would love to cover that." Are you kidding me?
I was like, "How am I supposed to write a story about this?" But I did it.
Yeah, man.
and
I bet it was great. Do you still have it?
Probably somewhere. But I was just like, that was the craziest thing. Like, and you know, so I think about all the stories that I probably complained about them, that I'm like, it really prepared me, you know, for my career, because, you know, even as I was just showing my mother like Concord, the Concord Motor Speedway, I was like, oh yeah, I did a story at the Bristol Motor Speedway when everybody would show up to get married there, like on one day of the year. And I was so fascinated by like just all these people, like thousands of people, so they could just get married at the track.
Listen, I'm sorry to tell you this because you look like you're incredibly young. You don't have to tell me your age, but you know you're getting up there, and I'm 68, but you know you're getting up there when somebody will say something and you have a connection to it. You either covered the story, or you were in the story, or you know somebody who did the story.
Right.
Yeah, it's like that, right?
Yeah, love it, love it. Like, I feel like this totally, I'm all off topic, but I'm like loving this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, this is the conversation that my kids walk out of the room on. It's, you know, it's that kind of stuff. But it's, you know, it's, I don't want to be, you know, I love Steve Allen, the entertainer Steve Allen, but before he died, he just became so angry, and I felt bad for him. But now I've like, my wife is saying, "You're getting really angry." I said, "Oh no, it's like grumpy old men, you know." Oh right. My gosh.
So I have to ask you about, you know, Roundball Rock, of course.
I'm changing cameras because my battery's dying on this one.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, what do you want to know? It's the most ridiculous thing ever.
How did you write it? Like, how did you come up with that? Like,
yeah, wow, this thing is really shiny or something. This is really cool. I'm not sure what it's doing. When I was, let me just turn off this camera because it's beeping like crazy.
Okay.
Hold on. Yes, this is live, folks. We're live. All right. Thank you for stopping beeping. The cool thing about, I mean, if you know anything about Walter Mitty or any of those guys, you know, back in history, where it was just sort of like, you know, hey, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do that. You know, I didn't put much thought into anything, and which just makes no sense because I had really terrible stage fright as a kid.
Really?
Because there were too many. Yeah, there was too many of those recitals. I just didn't. I hated them, and so when I got some therapy for that right out of college, and I spent 2 years in therapy, and it just changed everything. I became one of those people who like would do anything, you know, and so here I am, a news correspondent at Channel 2 in New York, you know, the flagship station for CBS. Right. And I'm there for like 8 or 9 years. And all of a sudden I get this call out of the blue. And this is in the book from Terry O'Neill and Van Gordon Sauter, who are the heads of CBS. They were the heads of CBS Sports there. And they said, "Hey, would you like to come work for us?" You know, and I said, "Who is this?" You know, and they told me, you know, and I said, "I think you may have the wrong guy. Did you see something else on TV that you thought was and he goes, no, we want you. We saw you do some live stuff, you know, and we've seen you anchoring on the weekends and you know, and with Jim Jensen and it's Van Gordon Sauter who just never minced words. He goes, "Yeah, you should come work for us. And besides, you look really bored on the air now." And that, which is a nice thing to say to somebody you're trying to hire. Yeah. And the truth is, I was just sort of like I just that was it. I had fires and explosions and drug deals, and I was just like, you know, I was going undercover, and you know, it was exhausting, you know. And so he described the job where he said, "Yeah, you do this and do that," and I said, "Wait a second, I can't. You have to understand, I can't name 5 NBA teams." And he's like, no, that's not what this is. It's the events you're going to be doing. nobody's ever seen them before. And I said, what's that? And they said, well, it's speed skating, downhill skiing, Mr. Universe in Egypt, and you'd be traveling all over the world. You'd probably live in Europe for the next 6 years, And so I said, well, okay, where do I sign up? So I did. And the reason I'm telling you this long backstory is that all these events that I was doing, which are known as the anthology events, like figure skating, like gymnastics, like Ironman triathlon, and especially the Tour de France bike race.
Right.
A lot of those, because David Michael is this great producer, because he was producing them, and we turn them into like two-hour every week documentaries. He used a lot of music, but he was using needle drop music from like Mannheim Steamroller and Yanni and stuff like that, and it just kept running out. He didn't have any more music. Yeah. And I said, I remember in the van one time when we were coming to Tour de France, I said, David, I could write this music. He goes, well, why didn't you tell me? And he goes, let's how do you write it? And I said, well, I use these synthesizers and this and that. This is in the 80s, so this is 80s music, And so they did. They shipped out my synthesizers to a van. And we went from finish line to finish line on the Tour de France, and I wrote an hour and a half, 2 hours of music every single week for 5 weeks. It really taught me how to be a film composer or a documentary composer. And so I was in that group of I was writing themes for basketball, for football, and all that because I knew all the producers, right? Yeah. They would say, oh, you know what, we need to put this out here because we're looking for a theme for this or that. And they go, hang on, how's this? And so they didn't want to have to go through a whole process. They were like, that's fine. We don't have any money. I said, don't worry about it. I'll just take the publishing and it'd be fine. We'll just get the BMI thing. Here's the papers now. Sign right here,
Yeah.
And so that's what I was doing. And then when I found out that NBC, I was still on NBC, found out that they got the coverage for the NBA basketball. Everybody was trying to get that theme. And I just said, wow, if I could do this, I would definitely be, I might be able to put my kids through college, Not that I was thinking about money. And so I got this idea in the middle of the night, for what would a basketball theme sound like? And I sang it. I was in Europe, and I sang it into my answering machine in New York. And whenever I tell this story on stage, I have to explain to people what an answering machine is.
I remember you told the story at the Hall of Fame induction.
Yeah. So I sang the theme into the machine, that kind of thing. And then I sang, I called back because it cut me off. I didn't think much of it, I think, oh, whatever, maybe that's something. And so I got home 2 weeks later, and I checked my messages. I think I only had 2, and it's still popular. And I put the answering machine on my piano and rewound it, and I figured it out on the piano. If I had a piano here, I would play it for you. What's the matter? There's supposed to be a piano every 6 feet. Come on, get on that. Hopefully my wife didn't hear that. And so I figured it out, and I got the band to play it with me, my band. And then I spent my own money, and I hired a small orchestra to play it.
Wow.
And then the magic sauce, you know with experience, that if you're going to try and land a gig, you have to take away everybody's imagination.
Yes.
So what I did was I mixed it up, right? And then I put it on this VHS tape that I had edited with my, with our editing credentials. Right. And it was all fast breaks of Magic and Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and and all the rest of those guys.
Yeah. And
then I put it on there, and it seemed sort of weird. It was like, well, this doesn't fit completely. And the editor who was with me said, well, the music's too slow for the action. So I went back to the studio and with a stopwatch, and I found out that the dribble rate of a fast break was 132 beats a minute, which is like EDM. It's like fast disco, right?
Right.
And once I increased the tempo, right, and spun it up to that tempo, I laid it back onto the video, and it was perfect. And so I didn't send to Dick Ebersol, the president of NBC Sports, I didn't send him a cassette tapes. I sent him a VHS tape.
Oh, okay.
And so when they put that on in the conference room, there was a phone number on it. He called me up and said, "Hey, John, this is yours. You did this?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "This will work." And that's how simple it was.
This will work.
This will work. That was it.
Wow. Well, and the rest is history.
I can't tell that story any shorter. I'm so sorry.
No, I love it. I love it. Wow. Yeah. So I'm like, I probably should jump into the fan segment questions. I have a lot of people that follow me that are writers, journalists, some very young anchors and reporters. And so they really wanted to know if you have any advice for them with the industry the way it is now.
As in reporters and anchors?
Yeah.
Yeah. Boy, I mean, I think writing, and I think your writing and your voice are the two things that people really look for when they're looking. I mean, everybody wants to, I mean, every station manager wants a investigative reporter and all that. But I work so hard on my voice, and I've always worked on my writing. You know, it's if you phone in the writing, then it just never it never works. Even today, I mean, when we're done today, I'm going to go back and work on tomorrow's radio show, and it takes me, the Intelligence Fair Life show, it takes me 3.5 hours to write one show, and because I just want everything to be concise, and this, and I learned this working with Mike Kettering, and also especially with the Olympics. You know, I mean, I really learned how to be to everything that I am today. I learned from doing the Olympics and also doing the Tour de France, because the Tour de France was so much writing, and I emulating people that you admire. I mean, unfortunately, I tried to emulate Walter Cronkite when I was young. It was like, I started sounding on the air. I was like, "This is John Tesh, 2020 news. That's the way it is." You know, it's like the guy's like, "Hey man, you starting to sound like Cronkite. You better know how to back it off a little bit." But find somebody to emulate. B, really study writing and just write as much as you can. You know, what Bill Leslie taught me was the value of ad-libbing. Yeah. And I may have mentioned this, but what he used to do, I saw him doing it. I was his roommate. What he used to do is he would get a newspaper. He'd get the Raleigh News and Observer, and he'd pick like one or two stories, and he'd read it, and he'd read it, and he'd read it, and then he'd put it down, and he'd look in the bathroom mirror. I mean, I saw him doing this, and then he would project, right, and he would that was the camera, right, and he would ad-lib that story, and he ended up being one of the best ad-libbers. When you see people now, every now and then you'll see somebody who's just a tremendous ad-libber, and you're like, "Oh, how did they learn how to do that?" And it's just practice, practice, practice. It really is. And one more thing, and I know this name can be galvanizing, but there's a guy. I mean, I watch the news. I used to watch a lot of news, and it was just too much for me. And when this whole pandemic thing happened, and all the stuff with censorship, I ended up doom scrolling, and I had to stop. My wife said, "You're not going to get anything done." It was just too much. Yeah. But there is a guy who, like I said, he's galvanizing, right? Because he's on one side and not the other. But he started out as a writer and continues as a writer, and understands the medium of television, and understands the meaning of getting to the truth. But also writing in a fashion that's entertaining, and that's Tucker Carlson. Yes. And he's on Fox. But there are people, and if you don't believe in anything that he says, whatever, you journalism students, just understand that the way he's writing is the way to write, right? And his presentation, it's stylized, but he has a brand, and that's the other piece of advice I'd say is you got to have a brand. And there's a great book. It's called Differentiate or Die. It's an old book, but it still stands up, by Jack Trout. Differentiate or Die, and it's how to differentiate yourself from everybody else. And in everything that I've tried to do, I've always had that book in mind, which is how can I do this and have it be different? How can I have my sound of music be different than anybody else's? Right. How can my delivery be different? Within a framework.
I'm gonna check that book out, because I know when I created a blog called The Mofo Chronicles. So when I started my channel, I thought, I can't call up Dionne Warwick's people and say, "Can you come on the Mofo Chronicles?" That doesn't work. So I had to go back, and my mentor said, "You've got to differentiate yourself as are you going to be Mofo Chronicles or are you going to be Shamika the journalist? And I was like, okay. And so I was like, now what? So it was just having to do a whole rebrand and a whole kind of let me step back and figure out what is it that's going to make me look different. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah, and it's it's that thing too where when I came up with the idea 20 years ago for Intelligence for Your Life, music and the John Tesh radio show, Music and Intelligence for Your Life, the guy that I hired to do the affiliation, a guy named Scott Myers, just said, "What is that, a seminar?" And I said, "No." I told him I'm a big fan of just saying what it is, and then understanding the brand and always staying true to that brand. So we've had one of the reasons why we haven't let iHeart or Cumulus or Entercom or any of those guys, buy a piece of us is that we wanted to be agnostic. We wanted to be able, because we always get advice. Well, you should take phone calls. You should do celebrity birthdays again, and or you should do this. You should that. I said no. And even Lin-Manuel Miranda said this when they asked how did he create Hamilton? Yeah. And in the Heights, he said, I just picked a lane. I stayed in that lane. Yeah. And I just stayed focused and I never stopped. Right. And he preaches that to kids now. And he says, you're going to lose friends. You're going to lose opportunities. You're not going to have any fun. Yeah. But on the other side of that is greatness.
Yeah. And for me, it's also fulfilling when you find your lane and you work at making that great. I think that has a lot to do with it. And one of the things that, and I actually had a question about Intelligence for Your Life, because I wondered, well, I mean, you kind of just answered it, but I also wondered, like, what, when you came up with the idea to do it, what was kind of behind that? What was, why not try, I don't know, I can't even think of something else, but like, why did you decide that this radio show is what I want to do?
Well, I left Entertainment Tonight to follow my dream, which was playing music. And so when the Red Rock special happened, and we went from selling 50 records a month to 50,000 basically because of the PBS special hit, I went to Entertainment Tonight and said, I didn't say it like this, but I said I quit. It's an interesting chapter in the book too, because they sued me, to try and keep me in my contract. And everybody was saying, I was making $1.5 million a year working 4 hours a day. I mean, it was the most ridiculous. I'm telling you, and that was when I left 1996. I don't even know what that's worth now. Yeah. The only reason I give you that number is that people are like, "You're nuts. You're crazy. Yeah. You got to go play your music." And my wife was with me. She said, "Are you crazy?" No. She said, "You got to follow your dream." You do. So I did that for a while. I was on the road for 50, 60 shows in a row. I mean, it was really, because that's the most efficient way to do it, to do them all at once. But after a while, we had a 2-year-old at home, Prima, and my wife was raising the Italian eyebrow, and it was like, I think maybe you should find something else to do along with maybe a couple of these shows, Yeah. And so I thought, well, I should probably try and get back into the business. I did not want to get back into television. I felt like it was a young man's game. I mean, I was 45 at the time, so I guess I wasn't. But I decided I want to get back into radio, but I didn't want to do love songs at night. I really wouldn't have been good at, Fluffy Danny and the Weasel in the morning or the Howard Stern show. That takes a special kind of talent. I just didn't have that talent. Yeah. And it's just like no sleep. And I thought, what is it that I'm interested in? And I couldn't figure that out either. And then one night when Connie and I were going to sleep, she looked at my side of the bed and she said, "What is all this madness here?" And it looked exactly like this. It was just, wires and cameras and just everything, in the bedroom, not cameras. That's weird. That's weird, but there's lots of wires, Right. And she said, this looks like Radio Shack is vomiting in our bedroom. This is our sleep chamber. What the heck are you doing? And so I looked over. Oh, this is great. We got the camera work. I looked over on her side of the bed, and what I saw was a whole bunch of magazines that had sticky notes coming out of them. And I said, "Well, what's all this crap?" And she said, "These are all the magazines that I want. That the articles are marked with sticky notes that I want to get to, but I just haven't had time." And that was really when the light bulb went off. And I said, well, there's so much information out there now. The internet was in its nascency, and a lot of people were just searching, a lot of different things.
Right.
And so I thought, why don't we be curators for great information? So we hired 10 researchers, this for a radio show, and went to a couple of companies, and they said, too expensive. If you can do this with 2 or 3 people, that's fine. So my wife and I mean, just like we did Red Rocks, we self-financed it, and we started with 6 stations, and now it's over 300. I mean, there's 8 million people a week that listen to the show. Yeah. So but it took us a while to get that audience, but the audience, they spread the word for us.
Thank you for chatting with me today on Check the Rhymes. You'll have to come back soon.
I'd love to, and congratulations on differentiating yourself. I love it.
Thank you.